It's great to be in Israel again, and people in Israel probably don't quite understand how important you are to America. And my key message is that Israel is a lot more important to America than America is to Israel at the moment. And I know this as an investor and as a 30-year writer about technology. I mean, I've written 17 books or something about technology, and I really have focused on it and drilled in. I'm famous in 1991 for telling the people at Microsoft that the major computer of the next era will be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It will navigate streets. It will recognize speech. It will collect your news in your mail. It just might not do windows, but it'll do doors, open doors to your future. Anyway, this was regarded with some skepticism at Microsoft at the time, but it seems to be pretty much played out. In beginning speeches, particularly early in the morning, I like to offer an old counsel from Peter Drucker. And most of you know who Peter Drucker is, the founder really of business management theory. He wrote 20, 30 books on business management and is really the great guru and theorist of business management. He really established the field. And he used to counsel, don't solve problems. When you solve problems, and what could Peter Drucker have meant when he said don't solve problems? I mean, human beings get up in the morning and they begin solving problems. That's what they do. But Peter Drucker said don't solve problems. When you solve problems, you end up feeding your failures, starving your strengths, and achieving costly mediocrity. Don't solve problems. Pursue opportunities. And right now, this whole world economy is embroiled in a gigantic economic problem. And the more we try to solve it, the worse it gets. How can you tell when an economic paradigm has failed? One way is that the leading institutions in the world economy start saying, oops, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office in the United States, recently had to readjust its forecast for 2016, made just 2 years ago, by $1.6 trillion. And meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund, which also makes projections, made them 2 years ago, had to project its estimate for world GDP by $18 trillion. This is an illustration of a collapsed paradigm. In making the previous projections, the fundamental assumption was that the global economy is essentially driven by aggregate demand, and there are various forms of the theory. The Keynesian theory stresses government spending. The monetarist form of the theory stresses the expanded money supply and central bank reductions of interest rates. But all of it is essentially asserting that growth is a product of demand which can be manipulated by central banks and which produces ultimately growth. And I think this paradigm has been tested in the last 5 years since 2008. So I guess it's 7 years now. Since 2008, there have been 619 interest rate reductions by central banks around the world. There have been some $13 trillion in negative government debt with negative interest rates. That's paying where the saver has to pay the bank to take the money. Negative interest rates are kind of the ultimate sort of impasse of conventional economics. They're interest rates. Never throughout the history of the world have people imagined negative interest rates until the last few years. Switzerland had to adopt them briefly a few years ago because of bad monetary policy in other countries, and particularly in the euro area, forced the Swiss to just fend off deposits in Switzerland. But in general, negative interest rates sort of represent the end of the line. The leading economist at Harvard today is probably Ken Rogoff. He wrote a terrific book called This Time It's Different with Carmen Reinhart, which went through all the history of financial crises over the centuries and made very penetrating observations about them. This year, he's just published a book, just came out last week or so, called The Curse of Cash. It's kind of antidote for my book, The Scandal of Money. And in The Curse of Cash, Ken Rogoff illustrates what happens when economists push on solving problems beyond the point of no return. The fundamental rule of holes is when you're in a hole, stop digging. And Ken Rogoff's advice for the world economy today is not only negative interest rates, but also abolition of cash. So you combine the abolition of cash with negative interest rates on the grounds that without the abolition of cash, cash would be a better investment than an investment in a government bond yielding minus interest. And so in order to have negative interest rates, which according to Rogoff would be by far the most effective instrument available to central banks, you should have, you have to abolish cash at the same time. So policies are reaching an extremity that suggests the end of a paradigm and a moment of a major paradigm change. And I believe that there is a new economic paradigm available, which originates in the very technologies that have explained the incredible triumphs of the Israeli economy, which I call the info nation in knowledge and power, and which epitomizes the generation of value beyond mere material commodities and resources. And the heart of the new paradigm of information theory is a new definition of wealth. And I think that one of the major problems of the whole old paradigm that's reached its conclusion is they don't grasp the essential nature of wealth. Wealth is knowledge. How do we know that wealth is knowledge? Well, as Thomas Sowell wrote decades ago, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the material resources that we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is entirely the accumulation of knowledge. That's what wealth essentially is. Cesar Hidalgo, an interesting economist at MIT, just last year wrote a book called Why Information Grows, in which he had a further example. He said, when an expensive automobile crashes into a wall, all its value disappears, even though every atom and molecule remains. Value is information. The car is knowledge. And just another way of making the key point that in an information economy, and all economies are ultimately information economies, wealth is knowledge. And if wealth is knowledge, that might explain how Israel, for example, could emerge as the spearhead of global technology. But wealth is knowledge also explains economic growth in a new way. If wealth is knowledge, what is growth? Growth is learning, which is the process of the acquisition of knowledge. And I came to this insight before any of the others in my book, because for decades I've been interested in learning curves. Learning curves were really originated in a study in the US Navy that was taken to Texas Instruments by Patrick Haggerty, who was the key founder of Texas Instruments. And the success of Texas Instruments, the first great leader in semiconductors, was based on application of the learning curve, which Haggerty encountered first in the Navy. And it ordains that with every doubling of total units produced, costs drop between 20 and 30%. Now, the Boston Consulting Group, which provided a young man then named Bibi Netanyahu with his first job, was the originator of the learning curve as a systematic proposition of business analysis. They demonstrated learning curves in everything from transistor units to poultry to eggs to insurance policy, dollars to lines of software code to trucking miles. It didn't matter what it was. All businesses show the learning curve. Later, the Bain and Company extended it even more broadly and called it the experience curve. And it's the most well-documented fact of capitalism that prices drop with every doubling of total units by between 20 and 30%. This has real meaning because it means that what is typical and what you should expect in a successful economy is declining prices. And this really is contrary to the prevailing paradigm, which has drilled in on something called deflation as the worst problem in economics, and has motivated virtually all the central banks of the world to target a positive rate of inflation between 2% and 4%. Rogoff discusses all various pros and cons for a higher or lower inflation rate target, but everybody assumes that prices naturally should be drifting upward in a growing economy, and that deflation is a acute problem. But the learning curve tells us that, in fact, unless government policies are unfavorable to enterprise, unfavorable to productivity and growth, prices will be constantly dropping. So, but the learning curve is the most fundamental principle of economics from my point of view, and it is because it's a real principle. It's something that actually happens in every economy rather than blows the monetary theory that or such as aggregate demand or the money supply or all these various even GDP. The learning curve is a real foundation. So growth is learning. That's not, learning, however, is a real process. It follows rules, and you can't have learning just as by announcing that you have learning. In other words, most universities do not accomplish a lot of learning. Karl Popper really expounded the fundamental theory of learning. It has to be falsifiable. You have to be able, it's experimental. You have to be able to disprove the propositions in the learning process have to be couched in a form that can be disproven, that can be falsified. And the reason that capitalism is so effective in producing growth is that it accommodates an extraordinarily fruitful learning process that observes Popperian rules. That is, every business is really an experimental test of an entrepreneurial idea. And it can fail as well as succeed. And failure is absolutely critical to any effective and successful learning process. So economies really can be considered to be aggregations of huge numbers of experimental tests of ideas. And that is the essence of entrepreneurial capitalism. It's really the essence of the Israeli economy. On Wednesday, I'm going to be talking specifically about Israel and what I learned about Israel. But the essence of it is that it is an information economy. So if wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, and what is money? And this has been a question that I've had for a long time. And it seems to me that a crucial property of money is that it has to be a measuring stick. It has to be able to measure the wealth and the growth. And crucial to any measuring stick is that it not be part of what it measures. It has to be outside the system that it measures. And thus, the theory of money that prevails in the old paradigm, even the Austrian paradigm, I think is deeply flawed. It's a theory that assumes that money is a commodity in some way, that through history people bartered, and at times certain bartered products become so homogeneous and portable and money-like that they come to be used as money, but their ultimate value somehow stems from their role as a commodity. Of this debate revolves around the most successful money that's ever been created, really, over the centuries, which has been gold. Gold has really been the essential monetary element. And everybody who's tried to understand what makes money effective as a store of value, a transactions medium, a unit of account, always comes back ultimately to gold. And a lot of people imply that gold is valuable because it's got its uses as jewelry, it has some industrial uses, it's highly conductive, it's more conductive than copper. It has various applications that account for its value. In other words, money is valuable, according to this model, because it's really jewelry. That its value derives from it being shiny and attractive and desirable, and which imparts a residual worth that explains the universal acceptability of gold as money. But a friend of mine turned it around and said that no, gold is not money because it's really jewelry. Jewelry is valuable because it's really money. And it's really money that is the valuable element. And the fact that gold has other uses is really irrelevant to its worth as money. And this conclusion was developed by Satoshi Nakamoto when he was attempting to produce a new form of money, which took the shape as Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was designed to mimic the value of gold. And Bitcoin is really an effort to produce digital gold. And it's, and I've been working with Bitcoin for a long time now, but the essence of it is that Bitcoin is not based on any utility outside its role as money. It's mimicking gold. It's not shiny. It has none of the desirable properties. It's not malleable for jewelry. It has what imparts the value to money? Well, one factor is scarcity. And this leads to the question of what remains scarce in a capitalist economy when everything else is growing more abundant? What is the element that always remains immutably scarce when everything else grows abundant? All those learning curves all across the world capitalist landscape. What remains scarce is time. And money, if wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, money most essentially is time. And this is kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people. How can money be time? I mean, we hear time is money, and interest rates are all about the time value of money or the money value of time. But most fundamentally, the scarcity of money, the value of money, is its ability to translate into the economy the fundamental scarcity and irreversibility of time. And so when you have zero interest rates, you're kind of zeroing out time. Now, everybody in the old paradigm believes that low interest rates spur economic growth, excite entrepreneurial energies, arouse animal spirits in Keynesian terms. But the fact is, we've seen over the decades in Japan, and now we're launching decades in the United States and other economies, that low interest rates do not spur economic growth. And zero interest rates represent, in fact, throwing away the clock. And if you imagine a basketball game, we think about basketball game a lot these States, but a basketball game, you throw away the clock, as Jim Grant, who's author of the famous newsletter in the United States called the Interest Rate Observer. He's one of the great experts on interest rates, and he observes zero interest rates are like throwing away the clock in basketball. If you didn't have a clock, shot clock, no one would have to shoot. You just pass the ball back and forth, keep all options open, and keep the ball away from LeBron or whoever it is who's the big threat. In other words, low interest rates allow entrepreneurs just to delay. That allows that you don't have to pay for the passage of time, so you can just keep all projects underway. Like all the projects that have weighed down the Chinese economy, and where essentially the state sector in China, all those big state enterprises, have had virtually zero interest money for decades, and they never have to make any decisions. They don't have to prioritize. They don't have to allocate. They don't have to trade off between one good goal and another. All these factors are imposed by money, which introduces the effect of time into the economy. And essentially, when you have zero interest rates, you're saying time is meaningless. There's no opportunity cost in spending now. There's no yield to saving for the future. And this message, which zero interest rates convey in a capitalist economy, explains the global slump that we see around the world. It's that started in Japan and has moved to Europe and the United States, is really manifested by these zero interest rates. But it's worth making a crucial observation here. I do not agree with the general stance that it's the central banks that are doing all the damage, that this is an effect of the central banks. The central banks do paper it over and cover it up. But in fact, the zero interest rates are real signals from the economy, and they indicate the average yields to be expected across the economy. And central banks really can't control long-term interest rates very fully. They can influence them, but they can't really control them. And the fact that these zero rates that have been adopted by central banks also are affirmed by long rates, long bonds as well, 10 and 30-year bonds, suggests that there's a real factor in the global economy that also is resulting in this general sluggishness and slump and stagnation. And there have been lots of analyses about this stagnation that the world economy is experiencing. And the old paradigm Keynesian economists have all developed their theory. And they want to blame entrepreneurs and scientists and engineers. They want to say that the real cause of the slowdown in the world economy is a collapse of creativity and technological productivity and the inventiveness in the private sector, and that we're just have reached a fundamental doldrums in the history of capitalism. Robert Gordon, a great Keynesian economist in the United States and economic historian, has written a huge tome which goes through all the history of the US economy in technological terms, and shows the just vast transformations that were affected by the original Industrial Revolution, the trains and cars and planes and washing machines and tractors and clean water and antibiotics and all these technological breakthroughs, according to Gordon, are really essentially one of a kind. And they happened once in human history, and we cannot expect them to happen again. This observation is contrary to what Mike Eisenberg was saying last night, that this was a period of unique transformation and possibility, that companies like Uber and Airbnb and WeWork and all the Google and all these companies are accomplishing technological breakthroughs that are uniquely disruptive and have extraordinary numbers of victims because of the profundity of the changes they portend. But the prevailing view of economists in America today is exactly the contrary, that social networking and search and cloud computing and all these advances, in fact, are relatively sterile compared to the creation of railroads back and forth across the country, the emergence of radios and telephones and air conditioning and central heating and hygiene and, you know, just all the great features of the previous Industrial Revolution dwarf this one. And all of you should think about just where you stand on that great debate. It's a real debate. And I believe that transformations now will be just, or possible transformations are just as great as ever before in human history. That this is not a moment of stagnation and failure, that it's a time of vast opportunities that are really being pioneered in Israel more than in any other country in the world. And I think that the fact that in the face of these vast possibilities, economies around the world are deeply embroiled in addressing problems of the old paradigm, suggests a major need for a new economic paradigm, and I think information theory offers it. David, and what do you do?
I study economics.
Okay. Which university? Tel Aviv. Oh.
I want to ask about this idea of money is time. I'm not very frustrated yet.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, we gave the example of zero interest rate.
Yeah.
Okay, and we said, okay, now time is worth nothing. Actually, and I think it's because you can measure time, value of time with money. You can measure value of water with money and everything else. It doesn't mean that money is water, money is not beauty, money, I think it's not time either.
That's right.
So, I think I understand the idea of money is time.
Well, you just said that the reason money can measure water and measure computers and measure all these other commodities or elements is that they are not, that money itself is not a commodity. If money was a commodity, part of what it measures, then it couldn't measure these things and couldn't offer a secure foundation for measurement. I mean, we have a lot of experience with measuring sticks. You know, Système International in Paris connects all the major measuring sticks used in international trade and industry to specific physical constants that can't be changed. And it's the various measuring sticks are the second, the meter, the kilogram, the candela, the mole, I've left one out, but the ampere, important. But when you, and all these different measuring sticks that explain how international trade can proceed, how a microchip designed in Tel Aviv for system concept originated in Silicon Valley can be fabbed in Taiwan for implantation in a circuit board in Shenzhen and production in Paris or whatever. This is all possible because these measuring sticks are all universal and based in physical constants that can't be manipulated. When you actually scrutinize all those physical constants, every one of them has a time factor, that the ultimate source of the regularities of all these physical constants is time. For example, this The meter is measured by some emission, high-frequency emission of cesium, of the cesium atom. You go through all the various measuring sticks, and each one ultimately has a frequency of some sort involved in it that roots its final regularity in time. And I think money is the same way, and that money can gain its regularity and predictability as a foundation for global commerce by its root in what remains scarce when everything else grows abundant, and that is time. You can. Another way to think of it is to think of a barter economy, where there's nothing else, no storage or any sort of buffers or anything. Everything has to be sold immediately on its production, bartered with something else. And in such an economy, everything would be governed by the time of production. You know, the value would naturally be based on how long it took to produce it, because there would be no other real standard of value that manifested itself. And I think that what happens and when a barter economy is translated into a monetary economy is that that time standard of value gets transmorphed into a monetary standard of value, and money does result in the kind of irreversibility that's the key factor of time, and which forces trade-offs and allocations and prioritization, and thus makes money so important. And one of the anomalies of that giant book by Robert Gordon on the history of technology is that he identifies the date when he sees all these trends that he shows, these overwhelming trends of technological transformation and expanding productivity growth, all proceed throughout history until a particular date that he identifies as around 1971, just by accident, as far as I can see. But the only thing that really happened that dramatically affected the global economy in 1971, and which is nowhere mentioned in the pages of this gigantic 1,500-page tome, is that Nixon and the United States ended Bretton Woods and went off the gold standard. That was the key thing that happened in 1971. And he has all sorts of other factors based on declining productivity of research and development and lower sterility of new inventions and the lesser impact of information technology as compared to the big airplanes and space flights and whatever. So, but the fact is that in 1971, the overwhelming event was the end of the gold standard, which had been really the foundation of money for centuries. And there have been previous setbacks to it. Countries went on and off. But essentially, the gold standard was maintained and in various forms. And in 1971 was when it was decidedly the golden knot was cut.
George, we get this crystallized discussion about public policy, what the role of government is.
Yeah.
So every student here, in the process in which we did our interviews, read an article by John Cochran.
By John
Cochran from the Hoover Institute. So Cochran asked the question, what's going on? Why, in the United States, since World War II until around 2000, the average growth rate was about 3.5%. In the last 10 years, now it's 2%. We have a president of the United States now who, after 8 years, it's the first time in 50 years where there hasn't been 1 year where economic growth has reached 3%. Cochran talks about the profound implications of a drop of 1%, a huge number of drops, etc. So there's something going on.
Right.
Something going on. That now America, center of the engine of all this growth, is now not growing. So would you speak to it? What do you think is going on?
Well, I think why is America not growing? I think is we don't want to grow. I mean, if you go to all the universities, all the whole intellectual establishment in the United States is devoted to stopping growth in various ways. They're training students in the ways of halting power plants, blocking new pipelines, stopping alleged pollution. I think that the American economy is all sicklied o'er by a pale cast of green goo. And I think that it is distorting every decision made in the American economy. Everybody is solving a non-problem, and as a result, the energy of growth is declining. The periods of low growth always coincide with the periods of ascendant government and with ascendancy of socialism. And in the United States, we've had a very socialist regime for the last decade, and last 8-9 years, the end of the Bush administration was devoted to taking over the banks. And so I think that is the reason, and it's always the reason, and it's why I consider the critique of research and development and the productivity of science and all is really an alibi economics. It's to disguise the old paradigm by directing attention toward problems which really don't exist. They're an effect of government overreach, and I think this culture, adversarial culture that resists capitalist growth as a burden on the environment, even human population as a burden on the environment. And I mean, the chief scientist in the United States, the chief scientist in the White House and the head of all the key scientific committees in Washington is John Holdren. And I don't know whether you've heard of John Holdren, but he was the key collaborator with the Ehrlichs, who wrote a book called The Population Bomb in the 1980s that said we'd all be starving by now, and vast famines would arise during the 1990s, I believe, or he started with the 1980s and moved it to the 1990s. But, you know, Holdren believes that in order to have a sustainable planet, we got to have a population about half as large as we have today. And this is the chief scientist in the United States. He regards human beings as a burden on the planet. He looks with favor on policies that would drastically reduce this burden. And I think that there is a real ideological pandemic that can be described as Luddite. It regards the new machines as a dire threat to employment and prosperity and the environment dominant in Washington are climate cranks and weather bores. You know, there are people who fundamentally believe that you know, the big threat to the world is changing climate, and it's to me it's a bizarre idea with virtually no evidence, but even if it were in fact true, the policy of suppressing and really destroying the existing energy system does nothing whatsoever to enable a new energy system. The existing energy system is every generation uses less carbon per kilowatt hour or whatever. The move from coal to oil to natural gas to hydrogen to whatever it is, not to mention nuclear, means less and less. The natural evolution of energy in the world is going to be from carbon dense to carbon light, and if you aren't dismantling the old energy system, you can continue to have world economic growth to finance the new energy systems. It's all through history. That's how it's happened. But today, we have the quixotic belief that somehow stopping coal or stopping oil or thwarting the installation of gas lines can somehow make solar and windmills a productive way to support a global economy using petawatts of energy. And I just think it's a fundamental misconception, and it's absolutely overwhelmingly powerful in the American universities. It's associated there with the BSD movement. They're the two competitive moral causes in America, and the leading universities. And I think they contribute significantly, at least to explain 1% of the slowdown. And just in general, throughout history, when you have a whole array of new socialist programs launched, you get a slowdown of growth. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to identify it. I would I'd zero out zero-based budgeting of government. I'd want a drastic reduction in regulations. The idea that bureaucracies can generate regulations of their own based on nebulous connections to previous regulatory enactments results in a proliferation of rules that ultimately will bring the whole system to a halt. Mansur Olson, economist at the University of Maryland, a couple decades ago, wrote a book called The Rise and Decline of Nations. And he identified the decline of nations with the emergence of bureaucracies with their special interest supporters and sources of funding that can't be changed and which ultimately choke off the future of economies. But in combination with this attack on economic growth, you have and on technology. I mean, in the United States, you all know what carbon nanotubes are. They were one of the great inventions in America in recent decades. Was Richard Smalley and his team at Rice University figured out how to manufacture and control carbon nanotubes, which are made of graphene and which are single molecule deep planar sheets of carbon and rolled up into nanotubes. Well, carbon nanotubes have recently been declared by the EPA as a threat to the environment, that they somehow resemble asbestos, another element that has been falsely condemned for the effects of some small proportion of total asbestos production. But I won't go into the asbestos story. But carbon nanotubes have been banned for use in any consumer products in the United States. I don't think this will be upheld in the future. But the fact that a bureaucracy in called the Environmental Protection Agency can ban a major new technological breakthrough that has attracted billions of dollars worth of venture capital around the world, and which has all sorts of properties that render it uniquely suitable for all kinds of new potential technology, shows the way this bureaucratic engine has reached a deadly destination. But so that would be my sort of policy recommendation. I also believe that money, when money doesn't, people widely believe that gold is obsolete, a barbarous relic. It has no further utility as a foundation for money. But it's worthwhile contemplating the alternative. And the alternative, which was adopted at the behest of Milton Friedman, a great libertarian economist, was, and the belief that markets always are best, and was floating currencies. And we now have floating currencies galore. $5.3 trillion a day of currency trading. 77% of it performed by 10 giant banks. 98% of it speculative. And it fails to yield currency values that are anywhere near as stable as the economic activity that they're supposed to measure. And this is the scandal of money, that currency trading is by far the biggest activity in the world economy. It's 26 times all global GDP. It's 73 times all global trade in goods and services. And it separates finance from actual production and trade. It means there's no that the financial industry proceeds in its own course beyond time and space, and out of scale with the actual activities of the industrial economy, which are constrained by actually people going to work every day and producing something specific at the end of it.
Yeah. Hi, Liron. Studying my master's degree in economics.
You, what?
Studying my master's degree in economics in Tel Aviv. You said that money is time.
Yeah.
So, and the gold standard or gold is the best way to, it's the best currency. So is it the goal like measuring time because you need to mine it, just like Bitcoin? What makes it the best currency?
Yeah. The fascinating thing about gold is really by happenstance. Gold has, throughout history, has scarcely changed very much in the time it takes to extract it. Gold, as gold is, as the technology for mining gold has advanced with all new mining equipment and seismic gear and information tools, as the technology for mining gold has advanced, the gold to be mined has become more attenuated at ever deeper loads that are ever more arduous to extract. And as a result, the amazing fact about gold is that throughout history, it's taken roughly the same amount of time to mine an ounce of gold. And and Satoshi, in designing Bitcoin, actually tried to import that characteristic to Bitcoin, and he did through the mining process that he invented that supposedly simulates the gold mining process by similarly becoming more difficult as the mining proceeds. And so what remains as the source of the value is the constant an irreversible element of time. And irreversibility, all this leads to entropy and all those factors that are also common to information theory, and I write about knowledge and power. You're doing electrical engineering?
Yeah. So about the notion of time and money, if you and I will get $10 and we go to the store, we can buy the same thing with $10. But if we both get 10 minutes and we try to accumulate knowledge, we won't be able to accumulate the same amount. So the wealth, you said knowledge is wealth, we won't get the same wealth. So how can you compare measure of time in global money standards?
Yeah, well, that's a good. The essential question is if we can't go to the store and try to trade 10 minutes. I mean, we could go and offer to work for 10 minutes, but the fact is that what money allows is for us to abstract from all these details that you describe and import the fundamental, irreversible scarcity of time into our commerce. And the units of time will depend on technology, their actual productivity and value will depend on all sorts of factors beyond time But that's the crucial principle of information theory, that a metric can't be part of what it measures. Whenever I make these sort of proposals, there's almost always, economists always come, oh, I agree with that. Gold should take a role in the measuring stick, but we also should include Brent crude oil and sheaves of wheat and corn and commodities of all different kinds. But if money is going to measure these commodities, how can it be measured by them? And so the crucial thing is that money translates into the economy that fundamental substrate of scarcity of time and irreversibility of time, which is the key factor of human life. The speed of light and the span of life are the ultimate constraints in economic activity. And money is extremely valuable because it brings this reality principle to bear into economics. And it's why sovereigns always want to attack the integrity of money. It's because it's reality. And sovereigns imagine that power can trump knowledge. And it can't. And that is, wealth is real, and knowledge is real, and learning is real. They aren't notional, and time is real. Those are the real substance of economic life.
If I can ask another
Yeah.
question. Don't you think there are too many people on this planet?
Don't I think that there are too many people on this planet? No, there aren't enough. There certainly aren't enough Jews, I'll tell you that much.
Because you talk about accumulating knowledge and this is the will. But not all the people can contribute the same way. And some of them, I guess, probably use more knowledge than they can contribute. Well, it's not that easy to talk about it, but do you think they have place in this planet?
I do. I think that one of the fundamental principles of information theory, and particularly this was an issue that is important in EE to contemplate. Why is all information gravitating to the electromagnetic spectrum? I mean, this is something I predicted again back in 1990, that all information would tend to gravitate to the electromagnetic spectrum. And today, almost all information does get transmitted through the spectrum, whether in the form of 1550 nanometer optical signals or radio frequency signals or whatever. And the reason is that in information theory, the key factor is the ability to differentiate the message from the carrier at the other end of the line. And the electromagnetic spectrum, being guaranteed by the speed of light, can always be subtracted from the overall signal, yielding the actual message at the other end. And the principle of this is it takes a low entropy carrier. That's a carrier with no surprises, to bear a high entropy message, which is a message with lots of surprises. And on Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about creativity, and but the key principle is creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. But creativity comes as a surprise, and in information theory, information is measured by its news or by its surprisal, by unexpected bits, entropy in Shannon's terms. But it takes a low entropy carrier, and the key low entropy carrier in all cultures, as Bob pointed out last night to me about Hayek, understood that tradition, law, constitutional principles, religious faith, all these low entropy carriers, predictable carriers, are indispensable to bearing the high, unexpected, surprising, complex, creative offerings of human beings. So you need that low entropy carrier, and you need a society that takes care of all its people in order to have that low entropy carrier where people have faith to make the key commitments in darkness and time that are necessary to create an environment for ever multiplying populations.
Hey, my name is Moran.
Yeah.
I study double major BA in Business Management and East Asian Studies
Ah.
at Columbia University. And I've heard that you mentioned China before.
Yeah?
And I wonder if you can elaborate regarding the information theory, like by giving China as an example.
Yeah.
And if you think we should, like Israelis or maybe the US, learn from it and how.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, there's in the scandal of money, I have a lot of about China, because China has resisted this floating currency scheme that the Americans inflicted on the world in the early 1970s, and they refused to float their currency. You know, they followed when I was in China back in 1988, I was proud of answering when they asked me what was going to happen in 1997 in China. And I said that this was in 1988, and I said that 1997 was the year that Hong Kong would start taking over China. And that is essentially what happened. Hong Kong had always fixed on the dollar and became the fastest growing economy in the world, despite massive immigration from mainland China, by the way. I mean, Israel is remarkable in the world for accepting massive immigration, but it's dwarfed in terms of the size of the land and by the immigration absorbed by Hong Kong, and was this vast inundation of new population in Hong Kong a burden on their growth? Were there too many people in Hong Kong? No, Hong Kong has remained the fastest growing economy in the world, pretty much, throughout this whole history. And it really is a key answer to the question of whether there are too many people. But also, Hong Kong is also a key example, counterpoint to the argument that floating currencies are favorable to economic growth, because Hong Kong never floated its currency. It always fixed its currency on the dollar, and thus it had to suffer from the reverberations of monetary policy in the United States. But nonetheless, it had a predictable currency that entrepreneurs could rely upon for making long-term commitments. And similarly in China, Ji Changzhou is the key pioneer of monetary policy in China. He's currently head of their central bank, but he's long been their major theoretician of money. And he was an associate of Jiang Zemin, who was really the great pioneer of the mayor of Shanghai, who made Shanghai a free zone modeled on Hong Kong, and launched the free zone policy, which was the source of the success of the Chinese economy. And I always like to contrast the free zone strategy that China adopted with the centralized emancipation strategy that Russia adopted at the same time. And the Russian strategy, trying to liberate from the center out, issuing edicts of perestroika or whatever across the whole economy, maximized the opposition of everyone who had a stake in the old order. So it maximized resistance to the development of freedom. In China, the free zone strategy meant that all the economic activities started effervescing in the free zones, and everybody outside the free zones wanted to get in, and people in other cities in China wanted to make their cities into free zones so they could experience the ebullition that was visible in Shanghai and Shenzhen. And so the Chinese free zone strategy developed by Jiang Zemin and Qi Zhuangzhou, I never can spell it, but he's a great student of Bob Mundell, Robert Mundell, who's was Nobel laureate economist who really has been the leading advocate of gold and new forms of gold. I'll be talking about this for the new digital economy in the future. But China has, rather than going with Friedman, who, when I went to China with Friedman, and Friedman's advice was to the Chinese Communist government then was the key thing they had to do was get control of their money supply. And I was quite astonished by this advice from the leading libertarian economist in the world, telling government apparatchiks in China to get control of anything seemed to me to be unusual. My advice was, let 1 billion flowers bloom. And that was what they did, essentially. And they rejected Friedman, they adopted Mundell, they named their chief finance university in Beijing the Robert Mundell Center for Finance and Entrepreneurship or whatever. And 30 colleges in China named Bob Mundell their honorary professor. They passionately adopted fixed exchange rates and spurned American advice. And for this, American economists are indignant. But China prospered. The most successful relationship in the world economy was China-US. That's where all the growth happened. And Israel-US, I'll talk about that the day after tomorrow, I guess. But China is a fascinating case, and there are terrible things in China, and they are not a free country in many ways, but they have done a lot of things right. And Jiang Zemin was a great figure, that mayor of Shanghai at the beginning of the liberation. And his model was the IPO NASDAQ system in the United States, which he described as the great glory and precious jewel of the American economy, and which is an amazing thing for a Chinese premier to say. We're all done? Thank you very much. Thank you.